Daniel Schwartz. I teach Jewish history and direct the Judaic Studies Program at George Washington University. The question of what does it mean to be Jewish? I guess, just in my capacity as a historian, the way I'd approach that question, let's put it this way: it's difficult to kind of reduce it, to a single answer. And in fact, right now I'm teaching one of my standard courses, a survey of Jewish history from the Bible to modernity. And really, one of the core questions of the course is, what are the Jews? What does it mean to be a Jew? What are the boundaries of Jewishness? How have those boundaries evolved? How have they been contested? How have they been revised over time? And what I really try to drive home to my students in that class is the kind of extraordinary variety of forms that Jewishness and Jewish identification has taken over time. Some forms that eventually kind of were eclipsed or died out. Some that remain, vital and important today. But I think that would be something of a cop-out, right? If I just said, it's too big a question, to kind of provide any single answer to, or really just to leave it as a question, which is in some ways what I do in my course. So I was thinking, in terms of my own research, I've kind of studied the philosopher Baruch or Benedict Spinoza from the 17th century, this famous philosopher and heretic who was excommunicated by the Sephardic congregation of Amsterdam in 1656, goes on to become a famous, if highly controversial, philosopher, to write a work, the theological political treatise that has some very kind of hostile things to say about Judaism. But this becomes like one of the really kind of burning questions that people still debate today. Is Spinoza a Jewish thinker? Was Spinoza the first modern or secular Jew? So the whole question of Spinoza's Jewishness is one that I've really thought deeply about. I think that, perhaps one way of kind of answering this question of what it means to be Jewish, I think is it's ultimately a question of where does the individual or community we're talking about see themselves? Do they see themselves as part, of a tradition, of interpretation that extends, back to biblical Israel? Do they see themselves as part of that lineage? Do they see themselves as part of that genealogy? Or have they somehow stepped outside that? And do they view that in the third person? I think that's, kind of one of the yardsticks that I use with respect to Spinoza, and I think that it's helpful just in general. Again, thinking about it historically as opposed to the way, a rabbi or a theologian might approach the question, might be to say, does the individual or collective that we're talking about, do they see themselves as part of a tradition that is venerable, and as part of a community that sees itself, extending into the future as well? I think the question of whether one sees oneself as inside that, even if one is somewhat deviant, even if one's ideas are somewhat heretical, but one sees oneself as part of this tradition, right? I think that's what it means to be Jewish. Whereas if you kind of step outside of that, then, others might still consider you to be Jewish regardless of the decisions you make. But, in terms of your own self-identification, I think, perhaps you've kind of stepped outside the lines. So I guess that's how I'd answer the question.